A hero cop broke his 15-year-old stepson's bones and violated his soul, thinking his badge made him untouchable. He never counted on 96 Hells Angels riding 250 miles for payback. But when the bikers arrived, the cop's first move was a brutal legal trap that no one saw coming. Welcome to Blissful Whispers. You are not going to want to miss what happens next. Let us know where you're watching from and what time it is for you right now down in the comments. And before we get into it, make sure you like this video and subscribe to the channel so you never miss a story of justice. The absolute silence of 3:15 a.m. was broken only by the rhythmic shing of a polishing rag on chrome. In a garage lit by the low buzz of a single fluorescent tube, Grant Gunner Riley was at work. At 48, he was a man built of iron and old loyalties, his hands mapped with scars and stained with grease as they moved with a surgeon's care over the rocker box of a 49 panhead engine. The bike was his sanctuary, the one place the noise in his head went quiet. His club cut, the one that read President, above the iconic winged death head of the Hells Angels, was draped over a nearby stool like a flag. This wasn't a hobby, it was a ritual. On the cluttered workbench, next to a scattered carburetor, a burner phone vibrated. It was an ugly, aggressive sound, an electric shock against the steel. Gunner's hand stopped. He didn't look at the phone, not yet. His eyes flicked to the clock. 3:15. No call at this hour was good. No call on this phone was anything less than a catastrophe. He slowly, deliberately wiped his hands on a red rag, the grease just smearing into the lines on his palms. He picked it up. The screen glowed with an unknown number. He hit accept. Riley, he said, his voice a low gravel and used for hours. A woman's voice answered, sharp with professionalism but trembling at the edges. Mr. Grant Riley? My name is Laura Klein. I'm a social worker with Sunrise Hospital in Las Vegas. Gunner's entire body went rigid. The garage suddenly felt 20 degrees colder. Vegas. Hospital. Social worker. The words were a brutal combination. He said nothing, his silence a command to continue. Mr. Riley, I'm calling? She hesitated, taking a breath. I'm calling about a minor in our care. A 15-year-old boy. His name is Caleb Williams. The name hit Gunner like a physical blow. The steel wrench in his left hand slipped, clattering onto the concrete floor. The sound was deafening in the small space. He wasn't in the garage anymore. He was 7 years gone, in a hospital room that smelled of burnt chemicals, rubbing alcohol, and roasted flesh. Gunner had been sitting by a bed, his own face a raw map of red, one arm in a sling from a snapped collarbone. But the man in the bed, that was Theo Deuce Williams. Deuce was a ruin, swathed in white gauze, a forest of tubes running into his body as a ventilator breathed for him. They'd been at the chemical plant. A valve blew. A wave of blue-white fire. Gunner was blown back, but Deuce had already been out. Safe. But he'd turned back. He'd run back in for him, dragging Gunner's unconscious body out as the whole bay ignited. Now Deuce's lungs were shredded. He was dying. Gunner. The voice was a wet rattle from the machine. I'm here, brother. I'm here. My boy. Deuce coughed, a violent, soul-tearing spasm. Caleb, he ain't got no one else. Not really. His mom, she's weak. You gotta? Don't, Deuce. Save your breath. Tears cut clean tracks through the soot on Gunner's face. No. Swear to me. Deuce's grip tightened with a final surge of impossible strength. Swear on the patch. My blood. You watch him. You watch my boy. Swear it, Gunner. Gunner had leaned in, his forehead pressing against his dying friend's. He'd taken off his own heavy silver death head ring and pressed it into Deuce's bandaged palm. I swear on my life, Deuce. He's my blood. Always. I'll watch him. I'll protect him. Always. Deuce's hand had gone slack. His last breath had rattled out. Back in his garage, Gunner's knuckles were white on the phone. The word always echoed in the 3:18 a.m. silence. Mr. Riley? Are you still there? Laura Klein's tinny voice pulled him back. I'm here. His voice was different now. The gravel was gone, replaced by something flat and cold. What happened to him? He was brought in by his stepfather, a detective Kurt Hoffman. A cop. Gunner's jaw clenched so hard a muscle spasmed in his temple. Of course. Hoffman claims Caleb fell down a flight of stairs, the social worker continued, her voice dropping, the professional mask cracking. Mr. Riley, the injuries are not consistent with a fall. Not even close. We're looking at a non-displaced fracture of the left ulna, a broken arm, 2 cracked ribs the 7th and 8th, severe bruising across his torso, his back, and his face. Gunnar closed his eyes. He saw Deuce's face in the fire. He saw a little boy at a funeral, clutching his hand. "This has been happening for a while," Laura whispered, all pretense gone. "I can see the old, faded bruising under the new ones." The boy is terrified. He wouldn't say a word while his stepfather was in the room. Hoffman was polished, concerned. But the moment he left to take a call, Caleb just shattered. "You wouldn't tell me what happened. You just gave me your name. You said, call Gunnar Riley. You promised my dad." He promised. Gunnar looked at the half-finished panhead. The chrome seemed dull. The garage, his sanctuary, now felt like a cage. "Where's the cop now?" "He went home. He's coming back at 8 a.m. with a court order to take Caleb home. He says the boy is unstable and needs to be in his own bed. Mr. Riley, I can't stop him. Legally, he's the guardian. He's a decorated detective. My hands are tied." 8 a.m., Gunnar repeated. The words were dead. I have to go. I shouldn't have made this call. But the look in that kid's eyes. "You did the right thing," Gunnar said and hung up. He didn't shout. He didn't punch the wall. He stood in the 3:19 a.m. silence for a full 10 seconds. He then calmly picked up the heavy wrench he'd dropped. He looked at it, then with a controlled, violent grace he hurled it. It smashed through the garage's side window, the explosion of glass a satisfying crack in the night. Gunnar grabbed his phone, his thumb already on the secure messaging app. He opened the group chat, Hamk Berdu Press. His message was simple, sent to 95 members. "Deuce's boy is in Vegas. A cop is hurting him. Wheels up at 0500. This is church." He snatched his cut from the stool, swinging the heavy leather over his shoulders. The cold promise of the death had settled on his back. "A cop?" he snarled to the broken window. "A goddamn cop. The message, Deuce's boy is in Vegas. A cop is hurting him. Wheels up at 0500. This is church," hit the night like a thrown switch. Across the Inland Empire, 95 phones lit up. In a tract home in Fontana, a phone on a nightstand vibrated violently. Reaper, a man with knuckles like walnuts, untangled himself from a warm bed and a sleepy, protesting woman. "It's the club," he said, his voice flat, already pulling on his jeans. There was no why or what happened. The message was the answer. On the dark shoulder of the 210 freeway, Skid was hooking up a wrecked sedan to his flatbed. His phone pinged. He read the text, glanced at the half-finished job and unhooked the car. He dropped the keys in the ignition, left the engine running, and climbed onto the Harley strapped to the back of his rig. The dispatcher would scream, but it didn't matter. Church was called. At the San Bernardino clubhouse, Padre, the charter's treasurer, was closing out the bar's register. He saw the message, locked the till, and flipped the open sign to closed. He didn't bother locking the front door. By 4:45, the designated truck stop off the I-15 was no longer a desolate patch of asphalt. It was a sea of chrome and black leather. The air, cold and sharp with the smell of desert sage and diesel, now thrummed with the low-idling thunder of 95 Harley-Davidsons. They formed a silent, disciplined mass, their headlights cutting conical beams through the pre-dawn gloom. This wasn't a party. It wasn't a run. It was an assembly. At 4:55, a final, deeper roar joined the chorus. Gunnar Riley's pan had rolled in, parting the sea of bikes. He cut his engine, and in that brief pocket of silence, 95 pairs of eyes, hard and unquestioning, locked onto him. He swung a leg off his bike. Doc, the club's vice president, stepped out of the shadows. Doc was thin, wore wire-rimmed glasses, and looked more like a night school accountant than the intel man for a Hells Angels charter. He was holding a tablet. "Bishop's already spun up," Doc said quietly, his voice cutting through the idling rumble. "He's pulling files from his car. He'll meet us at the hospital." Arthur Bishop Cole, the man who'd traded his cut for a law degree, was their nuclear option. They were bringing him in from the start. Gunnar nodded, the grim set of his jaw illuminated by Doc's tablet. "What's the target?" "Detective Kurt Hoffman, LVPD." Doc swiped the screen. A picture appeared, a smiling, square-jawed man in a crisp uniform, shaking a politician's hand. He's not just a cop, Gunner. He's a goddamn local hero. Community Service Awards, Man of the Year, from the police union, saved a family from a fire last year. The press loves him. A low growl rumbled through the assembled men. A hero. It gets worse, Doc said, his face tight. He's smart. He must have known that social worker was suspicious. He filed a motion last night, just after midnight, for an emergency seal on Caleb's medical and family service records, citing privacy for a grieving minor. He's walling the kid off, building a legal fortress. Gunner looked at the picture of the smiling detective. He saw the systematic protection, the bureaucratic armor that monsters like Hoffman wore. The system looked the other way, polished his medals, and called him a hero while he was breaking a child's bones, Deuce's boy. But the angels were here. They would ride. This is the world we live in. A world of phonies who talk big about justice, who hide behind rules and procedures while evil guts the innocent. But talk is cheap. Action is everything. Hit that subscribe button if you believe in action, not just empty words. Only phonies who talk big and do nothing won't subscribe. Gunner turned from Doc and faced his club. 95 men, 95 brothers, who had left their lives in the dark because one word was spoken. They didn't know the details. They didn't need to. Deuce's boy was all the reason they needed. Gunner didn't make a speech. He didn't have to. He raised his chin. Vegas. We ride tight. He kicked his panhead to life. The roar was a signal. In a single deafening unified explosion of sound, 96 V-twin engines ignited, a wave of thunder that shook the ground and sent tremors through the cabs of sleeping truckers. It was the sound of a promise being kept. At 5 o'clock precisely, Gunner pulled out onto the access road. Behind him, in perfect 2x2 formation, the convoy fell in. A miles-long river of black steel and cold fury, it merged onto the I-15, a rolling mechanical beast flowing against the tide of the rising sun. They were 96 men, one patch, one purpose. They were heading for Las Vegas. They were heading for war. The first sign of their arrival wasn't a sound. It was a feeling. At 7:45 a.m., the morning routine at Sunrise Hospital was in full swing. Nurses chatted at their stations and the cafeteria hummed with the breakfast rush. Then came the vibration. A low-frequency rumble that started in the soles of their shoes and climbed into their teeth. Doctors paused mid-sentence. Patients near the windows looked down at the parking lot, confused. It wasn't an earthquake. It was something else. Then they heard it. It wasn't the scattered, high-pitched whine of sport bikes. It was the deep, concussive thump-thump-thump of V-twin engines, multiplied by 100. It wasn't a noise. It was a physical wave of sound, a rolling, mechanical thunder that drowned out the city traffic and rattled the glass in the ICU. The two security guards in the parking lot booth just stood, mouths open, watching the highway exit ramp. Gunner's panhead took the turn first, casual, as if he were pulling into his own driveway. Behind him, the convoy followed. It wasn't a chaotic swarm. It was a disciplined 2x2 column of steel, a black river flowing into the hospital's main lot. They didn't park. They filed in, splitting into perfect, organized rows with the precision of a cavalry unit. They filled every available space, their chrome flashing in the harsh morning sun. Then Gunner raised a single, gloved fist. The signal was caught and relayed. In a single, chilling, unified moment, 96 V-twin engines died. The silence that fell was more terrifying than the noise. It was absolute, heavy, and profound. The only sound was the click-click-click of 96 kickstands hitting the pavement in near-perfect unison. The bikers dismounted as one. They didn't talk. They didn't smoke. They turned, 96 men in patched leather, and formed a silent, imposing perimeter around the parking lot, their backs to their bikes, their eyes on the hospital's entrance. They were not protesters. They were sentinels. They were an occupying force and they were waiting. Gunner adjusted his cut and walked toward the automatic doors. He moved alone. The doors slid open with a polite, sterile whoosh. He stepped inside. The lobby was all polished tile, pastel-colored walls, and the quiet murmur of a television. Gunner was a creature from another world. He was 6'3" of road grime, diesel fumes, and patched leather, and he brought the cold desert morning in with him. Every eye snapped to him. The receptionist's hand hovered over the phone. A security guard by the elevators took a half step forward, then thought better of it. The air crackled with a tension the sterile environment had never known. Gunnar didn't look at them. He was scanning, his eyes hard. A woman in a cardigan and sensible shoes, Laura Klein, stepped out from behind a pillar, her face pale but resolute. "Mr. Riley?" He just nodded. "This way." Quickly. She was speed-walking, almost running, down a corridor. He kept pace easily. "He's in pediatrics, 4th floor. Hoffman isn't here yet, but his lawyer called the hospital administrator. They're trying to expedite the release paperwork now. They're citing parental rights. I think my boss is about to have me fired." "Get me to the boy," Gunnar said. It wasn't a request. They bypassed the public elevators, Laura using her key card to call a staff-only one. The ride-up was silent, the small box thick with her fear and his contained rage. The doors opened onto the pediatric wing. The walls were painted with cartoon animals and bright yellow suns, a grotesque backdrop for their purpose. A single, bored-looking uniformed cop sat in a chair outside room 412, scrolling on his phone. He looked up, saw Gunnar, and his lazy posture vanished. He stood up, his hand instinctively going to his belt. "Hey ma'am, you can't have." "He's with me," Laura said, flashing her ID with more confidence than she felt. "Family consultation. It's authorized." The cop looked from Laura's desperate face to Gunnar's. Gunnar just stared at him. Not a threat. Just a look of absolute, immovable fact. The cop, clearly intimidated by Gunnar's sheer presence, swallowed and stepped aside, his hand still on his weapon. Laura pushed the door open. "Caleb? You have a visitor." The room was dim, the blinds drawn. The boy in the bed was a ghost. He was small for 15, swallowed by the oversized hospital gown, his face a swollen yellowish-purple mask on one side. His left arm was in a bright blue cast, propped on a pillow. He was staring at the wall, his whole body coiled tight as if waiting for the next blow. "Caleb," Gunnar said. His voice, that rough road gravel, was softer than the boy had ever heard it. Caleb's head snapped around. His one good eye, Deuce's eye, widened. First in stunned disbelief, then in a dawning, agonizing, terrified hope. "Gunnar?" The name was a cracked whisper, as if he were seeing an apparition. "I'm here, kid." Gunnar crossed the room in 2 long strides, his boots silent on the linoleum. That was all it took. The boy's iron control, the dam of pure terror he'd built to survive, just evaporated. He lunged forward, his good arm wrapping around Gunnar's cut, burying his face in the president patch. He broke. It wasn't just crying. It was a raw, silent, body-racking despair. He sobbed into the leather, his small frame shaking so hard Gunnar was afraid his cracked ribs would puncture a lung. Gunnar didn't pat his back. He didn't offer empty platitudes. He put one massive, scarred hand on the back of Caleb's head, holding him steady, anchoring him. He let him break. "I got you," he rumbled, his voice a low vibration. "It's over now. I got you." After a long minute, the sobbing subsided into ragged tremors. Caleb pulled back, his face smeared with tears, but his eyes were suddenly hard. The fear was still there, but it was being eclipsed by a desperate, focused rage. "He's coming," Caleb whispered, his voice frantic. "He's coming to get me. You can't let him, Gunnar. You can't." "He's not taking you anywhere," Gunnar said. It was a statement of absolute, final fact. "You don't understand." Caleb gripped Gunnar's sleeve with his good hand, his knuckles white. "It's not just this." He gestured to his broken arm, to his bruised face. "It's my mom." Gunnar went perfectly still. "What about your mom, Caleb?" The boy's eye was wide, haunted. "It wasn't an accident, Gunnar. The car crash. He did it." The words came out in a rush. "I heard them fighting. All the time. She was going to leave him. She told him she found out. Something bad. And then he was in the garage all night, fixing the brakes on her car." Caleb choked on the word fixing. "She died the next day, Gunnar. On a clear road. He killed her. He cut her brakes." The air was sucked out of the room. This wasn't a rescue anymore. It was a reckoning. Murder. Gunnar's mind was reeling, processing the accusation, the implications, but Caleb wasn't finished. The worst was yet to come. The boy leaned in closer, his voice dropping to a barely audible whisper, his face contorting in a shame and self-loathing that was horrifying to see on a child. "And after she was gone, that's when it got worse." He couldn't meet Gunner's eyes. He was staring at the patch on Gunner's chest. He started coming into my room. At night. The unspoken words hung in the sterile air, heavy and black and suffocating. Hurting me. Gunner's blood didn't just run cold. It turned to ice. The chemical fire that had scarred his back was a distant, cool memory. This was a new kind of hell. This decorated hero cop, this public servant, hadn't just broken the boy's bones. He had violated him. He had taken everything from him. His father, his mother, and then, in the darkness, his innocence, his very soul. The rage that filled Gunner was so pure, so absolute, it was almost silent. It was a white-hot, focused point of light. He wanted to tear the building down. He wanted to find Hoffman and end him with his bare hands. This is the true face of evil. Not a monster with horns, but a man with a badge and a smile. A predator who preys on a child who has no one left to turn to. Hoffman didn't just break his bones. He violated him in the worst way possible after killing his mother. Comment, justice for Caleb, down below if you agree that predators in a uniform are the lowest, filthiest form of evil there is. Caleb was watching him, terrified of his reaction, terrified he'd finally said the one thing that would make Gunner leave. Gunner? Gunner forced his hands to unclench. He put his hand on Caleb's good shoulder, his grip firm, grounding. He looked the boy in the eye. Caleb, did you? Is there proof? About your mom? About any of it? Caleb nodded, a single jerky motion. I think so. She gave me something. Before she died. She made me promise. She said, if anything ever happens, you give this to Gunner. Only Gunner. Before Gunner could ask what it was, the door to the room slammed open, banging against the wall. What the hell is going on in here? Detective Kurt Hoffman stood in the doorway, flanked by his slick lawyer. His face was a mask of cold, professional rage. Get your filthy hands off my son. Detective Kurt Hoffman stood in the doorway, his uniform crisp, his face a mask of cold, professional rage. Beside him, a man in an expensive suit, his lawyer Finch, looked on with a practiced, neutral expression. The single uniformed cop who had been outside the room now stood behind them, hand hovering near his belt. Get your filthy hands off my son, Hoffman repeated, his voice low and sharp. Gunner didn't move for a second, his massive hand still on Caleb's shoulder. He was an anchor. He could feel the boy trembling under his grip. He gave a small, firm squeeze, a silent promise before slowly turning to face the detective. He rose to his full height, a mountain of black leather and road-worn fury, positioning himself between Hoffman and the bed. Caleb was shielded. Laura Klein, the social worker, rushed forward, her clipboard held like a shield. Detective Hoffman, this is a scheduled consultation. Mr. Riley is here at the patient's request. This consultation is over, Hoffman snapped, cutting her off. He didn't even look at her. His eyes were locked on Gunner, a look of pure, possessive hatred. This man is a known member of a criminal organization. He is not family. He has no rights here. Officer, he barked at the cop, escort this man out of the hospital. Now. Finch, the lawyer, stepped forward, his voice smooth as oil. Detective, perhaps we should handle this downstairs. This environment isn't helping your son's fragile state. Hoffman's lip curled. He gave Gunner one last look. You. Downstairs. We're not finished. No, Gunner said, his voice a low rumble. We're not. He turned back to Caleb, who was staring wide-eyed with terror at his stepfather. Gunner pointed one gloved finger at the boy. I'm not leaving this building. I'm downstairs. You understand me, kid? I'm not leaving. Caleb gave a short, jerky nod, his good hand clutching the hospital sheets. Gunner turned and walked out of the room, brushing past the stunned cop as if he were a piece of furniture. He didn't wait for the elevator. He found the stairwell and took the steps two at a time, the heavy thud of his boots echoing on the concrete. He needed the movement. He needed to put space between his fists and Hoffman's smiling, lying face. The revelation of what Hoffman had done to Caleb, the other way he'd been hurting him, was a white-hot coal in his gut, threatening to burn through his control. He emerged into the lobby. It was no longer quiet. The arrival of the cops, combined with the silent, menacing army of 95 Hells Angels still occupying the parking lot, had drawn a crowd. Nurses, orderlies, and visitors lingered, pretending to look at pamphlets while their eyes were glued to the developing drama. Through the plate glass windows, Gunnar could see his men, standing by their bikes, patient as stone, watching the entrance. The elevator dinged. Hoffman, Finch, and the two uniformed officers, the one from upstairs and his partner, strode out. Hoffman had composed himself. The rage was gone, replaced by a mask of pained, reasonable authority. He was on his stage now. He walked toward Gunnar, stopping a few feet away, projecting his voice for the onlookers. "Mr. Riley, is it? Look," he said, holding his hands up in a gesture of peace. "I appreciate that you were a friend of Theo's. I really do. And I understand you think you're helping. But you're not. You're frightening my son." He gestured to the glass doors at the wall of patched men. "You bring this thug gang here to a hospital? You're harassing a grieving family. You're traumatizing a sick boy who just lost his mother." His voice dripped with false sincerity, a perfect performance of a concerned father. "I'm his family. I'm his legal guardian. I'm doing my best to hold our lives together after a tragedy. And I am taking my son home." He stood there, a predator wrapped in a police uniform, lying to everyone's face. He used his badge as a shield, counting on the system to protect him while he hid his filth. He was the perfect arrogant bully, so sure of his power that he could abuse a child and then stand in public and play the victim. Smash that like button if you can't stand arrogant bullies who think they're above the law. Gunnar let the silence hang for a beat. He watched Hoffman's performance, the calculated sympathy, the way he played to the crowd. He saw the cold, dead eyes behind the mask. Then Gunnar took one slow step forward, planting himself directly in Hoffman's path to the elevator. He was an immovable object. "The boy called for me," Gunnar said, his voice a low gravel that cut through the lobby's murmur. It wasn't a shout, but it carried to every corner. "That makes it my business." The mask didn't just crack. It shattered. Hoffman's face went from pain to purple. The reasonable father vanished, replaced by the enraged tyrant Caleb knew. "Your business?" he hissed, his voice dropping to a furious whisper. "You are an outlaw. You are a piece of trash. You have no rights here. You have no say. That boy is my property, legally and in every other way." He stabbed a finger at Gunnar's chest. "You and your circus of freaks outside are trespassing. You're intimidating a police officer. You're interfering with a custodial matter. I could have every single one of you arrested and impounded before you could even start your engines. You think that patch makes you scary? I'm the law." The two uniformed cops stepped up, flanking Hoffman, their hands now resting on their holstered weapons. The hospital security guards, seeing the officer's posture, moved in as well, forming a loose, nervous semicircle. The lobby had become a powder keg. On one side, Detective Hoffman, his lawyer, 4 armed officers, and the hospital's authority. On the other, Gunnar Riley, alone, backed by the 95 silent warriors outside, who were now watching, unblinking, through the glass. Hoffman smiled, a cold, thin-lipped expression of pure victory. He thought he had won. He thought the show of force had ended it. "So," Hoffman sneered, "get out of my hospital, President, or I'll have you thrown out in cuffs." Gunnar didn't move. He didn't even blink. He just held Hoffman's gaze. The next move would light the fuse. The lobby was a tinderbox and Hoffman's threat was the match. The air was so thick with tension it was hard to breathe. Gunnar's hands flexed, his entire body coiling, ready to meet the violence he was being promised. The uniformed cops shifted, their hands now off their holsters, ready to draw. Whoosh! The hospital's automatic doors slid open, cutting through the standoff. A man in a $3,000 razor-sharp suit strode in. He wasn't a biker, not anymore, but he walked like one. He carried the same weight, the same air of absolute, unshakable confidence as Gunnar. He was Arthur Bishop Cole, the Hell's Angel who had traded his cut for a law degree and now wielded the state's legal code like a weapon. He didn't look at Gunnar. He walked straight past him and stopped directly in front of Hoffman's lawyer. "Richard Finch," Bishop said, his voice as sharp and cold as the crease in his pants. "I was wondering when Kurt would call you in for a cleanup." Finch's oily smile faltered. He clearly knew who Bishop was. "Arthur, this is a private family matter. Your client is trespassing." "My client," Bishop said, snapping open a sleek leather briefcase, "is the petitioner in an emergency action filed." He checked his watch. "Exactly 45 minutes ago with the Clark County Family Court. Case number 77-9. We have an emergency video hearing on temporary guardianship for Caleb Williams, scheduled for 1 hour from now. He slid a document across the reception desk toward Finch. With Judge Alistair Vance. The name hit the room like a physical shock. Hoffman's face, already flushed with rage, went pale. Even Finch took an involuntary step back. Judge Vance was a notoriously brutal ex-Marine who ate cops for breakfast and had zero tolerance for bureaucratic games. "You can't be serious," Finch stammered. "On what grounds?" "On the grounds," Bishop said, his voice dropping, "of severe physical abuse, suspicious endangerment, and," he leaned in, "credible allegations of sexual violation. So no, Detective Hoffman, you will not be taking your son home. You won't be going within 50 feet of him. And if you attempt to arrest my client, I will add witness intimidation and obstruction of a court order to the petition. Are we clear?" Hoffman was speechless. His authority had evaporated. He was no longer a cop in charge. He was a suspect on the defensive. Bishop turned to Gunner. "We need a war room. Now." "Cafeteria," Gunner rumbled. They moved as a unit. Gunner, Bishop, and Doc, who had slipped in unnoticed during the confrontation, stalked past the stunned lobby crowd and into the bright, sterile cafeteria. They commandeered a corner booth, a stark island of black leather and grim purpose in a sea of pastel tables. Doc immediately flipped open a ruggedized laptop, a portable Wi-Fi hotspot, and went to work, his fingers flying across the keyboard. Gunner stood, arms crossed, staring out the massive window that overlooked the parking lot. The vigil was holding. 95 men, still and silent by their machines. But they weren't alone anymore. A Channel 8 news van had just pulled up, its satellite mast extending. A reporter was already talking into a camera, with the silent, menacing army of Hell's Angels as her backdrop. The clock was now public. "They're painting us as the villains," Gunner said, not turning. "A gang intimidating a hospital." "Let them," Bishop said, loosening his silk tie. "It's a holding pattern. We just need the ammo." "Doc." "I'm in," Doc murmured, his eyes fixed on his screen. "Bishop, you were right. Hoffman's been a busy boy. He's not just a hero cop, he's a violent one. I'm pulling his internal service record. 2 excessive force complaints, both buried by his unit. A third one from a domestic call was withdrawn. He's got a pattern." "A pattern of violence," Bishop said, making a note on a legal pad. "That helps. That establishes character. But it's not enough. Vance will see it as a cop being a cop." "Then try this," Doc said, his voice tightening. "Just got into his financials. He's been liquidating. He sold a second property in Henderson 2 months ago. Cashed out his 401k last week. And 3 days ago, a wire transfer. $200,000. To an offshore account in the Cayman Islands." Gunner turned from the window. "He's running. He killed Deuce's wife and he's running." "He's planning to run," Bishop corrected, his face grim. "He was getting his escape route ready. This is huge. This is motive. This is intent." As he spoke, Laura Klein, the social worker, appeared at their table. She looked terrified, her eyes darting around the cafeteria, but she held a thin manila folder in her trembling hands. "I can't be here," she whispered, her voice shaking. "My boss finds out I'm fired. My license is gone." "You did the right thing," Gunner said, his voice softer. "That's not going to matter if he walks out of here with that boy," she said, her fear hardening into defiance. She slid the folder across the table. "These are not from your file. They were never officially added to Caleb's case. They're his mother's." Gunner opened the folder. Bishop and Doc leaned in. They were copies of ER admission forms from 3 different hospitals, stretching back 2 years. A fall down the stairs resulting in a broken wrist. A car door that caused a hairline fracture in a cheekbone. A fainting spell that led to a concussion and 2 bruised ribs. It was a clear, sickening, undeniable timeline of systematic abuse, all explained away, all treated at different facilities to avoid a pattern. Hoffman hadn't just started abusing Caleb. He had been abusing his wife for years, culminating in her murder. Bishop sat back, looking at the evidence spread across the table. The buried excessive force complaints, the $200,000 offshore account, and now the paper trail of spousal abuse. "It's a powerful case," Bishop said, his voice flat. "A pattern of violence. A clear motive to flee. A history of domestic terror. He looked at Gunnar, his expression grim. But it's all circumstantial. There's no smoking gun. Hoffman will get on that video call, wrapped in his uniform, and he will lie. He'll say he's a dedicated cop, a grieving widower, and that his stepson is a disturbed child being manipulated by a biker gang. Without hard proof, Judge Vance might just see what Hoffman wants him to see. The clock on the cafeteria wall showed 8:15 a.m. They had 45 minutes. "We have 40 minutes, Bishop said, his voice tight as he collated the ER reports from Caleb's mother. "It's a strong circumstantial case, a clear pattern, a motive to flee. But it's not a kill shot. Vance will still have to weigh the word of a hero cop against." His words were cut off. The sound of heavy, deliberate footsteps approaching their table. Not just one man. A group. Richard Finch strode into the cafeteria, but this time his oily smile was gone. It was replaced by a look of cold, predatory triumph. He wasn't alone. He was flanked by 2 hospital security supervisors and 2 new LVPD officers, their expressions hard, their hands already resting on their belts. This wasn't a parley. It was an eviction. "Gentlemen," Finch said, his voice full of false courtesy. He placed a single, stapled document on the table in front of Bishop. "This just came down from Judge Miller's court. Effective immediately." Bishop snatched the paper. His face, already grim, hardened into a mask of disbelief, then controlled fury. "Otero, you got Miller to sign an emergency temporary restraining order." Gunnar looked at him, not understanding the legal jargon. "What does it mean, Bishop?" "It means," Finch said, answering for him, his smile returning, "that it bars one Grant Gunnar Riley and any known associate or member of the Hells Angels Motorcycle Corporation, which the court has affirmed is a known criminal organization, from coming within 500 feet of the minor, Caleb Williams, citing potential for imminent intimidation and emotional distress." The trap snapped shut with the sound of a jail cell door. It was a brilliant, vicious, and perfectly legal move. Gunnar looked from the paper to the cops. Their stances were aggressive. Their eyes were bright. They weren't there to keep the peace. They were there for a fight. They were daring him to stand up, to give them the excuse. He was trapped. Utterly. If he fought, if he so much as breathed on one of the cops, he would be arrested instantly for violating a direct court order and assaulting an officer. He would prove Hoffman's entire violent criminal narrative to Judge Vance. The hearing would be voided. Caleb would be lost forever. If he obeyed, he would have to stand up, walk out of the cafeteria, and lead his 95 brothers off the property. He would be abandoning the boy, leaving him utterly defenseless, just as Hoffman's car pulled up to the curb. This is how they win. The corrupt system is protecting its own. It's not about justice, it's about power. They're using a piece of paper, a signature from a friendly judge, as a weapon to stop 96 men from saving a child. They're silencing the truth with a legal technicality. If you think that's a sickening abuse of power, hit subscribe right now. Don't let them silence the truth. Finch straightened his tie, savoring the moment. "As you can see, Mr. Riley, you are in direct violation of that order. You are, legally speaking, trespassing." He turned to the head of security. "Please escort these men off the premises. The officers will provide support." He gave Bishop a final, venomous smile. "The hearing is moot. I've already informed the administrator. Detective Hoffman will be taking his son home." The cops' hands were on their belts. Finch's triumphant smile was a mask of pure venom. Gunnar was a wolf in a steel-jawed trap, and every instinct screamed to chew his own leg off to escape. He looked at Bishop, but Bishop wasn't looking at the cops. He was staring, laser-focused, at his own open laptop. "You're too late, Finch," Bishop said, his voice calm, cold, and sharp. Finch's smile faltered. "What are you talking about? That order is signed. It's valid." "It is," Bishop agreed, not looking up. "But our emergency hearing with Judge Vance was already docketed and in his queue. And I've already scanned and emailed his clerk a copy of your little TRO, along with an immediate motion to quash, citing bad faith procedural abuse and blatant witness intimidation." Bishop turned the laptop around. A new window was open, a corporate-looking video conference link. It was active. "In fact," Bishop said, "Judge Vance is waiting. He'd like a word with you, Mr. Finch, and with Detective Hoffman." The color drained from Finch's face. He hadn't just ambushed them. He had walked straight into Bishop's counter-ambush. "Gentlemen," Bishop said, his voice dropping as he gestured to the two cops. "You can either stand here and explain to Judge Vance why you're in contempt of his hearing, or you can go get your client. Your choice." The cops looked at Finch, who was now sputtering. Your Honor, we need a moment to set up in a conference room." "We're setting up right here," Bishop said and clicked join meeting. The cafeteria's quiet hum was instantly replaced by the sharp, tinny audio of the call. The screen filled with the face of Judge Alistair Vance. He was in his 60s, with a shaved head, a face like a chunk of granite, and the cold, dead-eyed stare of an ex-Marine gunnery sergeant. He wasn't in chambers. He was in his home study wearing a simple black polo shirt, which somehow made him infinitely more intimidating. Hoffman and Finch scrambled into frame from a different room, the detective's face pale and pinched. "Mr. Finch," Vance's voice boomed from the laptop speakers, "you've been a busy man this morning. Woke up my colleague Judge Miller, did you? On his golf day?" "Your Honor," Finch stammered, "we had credible reason to believe the minor was in imminent danger from this organization." "You had reason," Vance cut him off, his voice like cracking ice, "to believe you were losing. I've read your TRO. I've also read Mr. Cole's petition. And what I see is a decorated police officer attempting to use a friendly judge to obstruct a hearing I already scheduled. That's a bad look, Counselor. A very bad look." Finch was silent, his face ashen. "The restraining order is temporarily suspended," Vance declared. "It's garbage procedure and you know it. However, I will not have my hearing or that hospital turned into a circus. The order stands for the rest of your associates." He locked eyes with the camera as if staring straight at Gunner. "Mr. Riley, I want every man you brought here who isn't you or your lawyer off hospital property. Not in the lot, not on the curb. 500 feet. Get them clear. Now." Gunner didn't hesitate. He stood, walked to the glass window and pulled out his phone. He sent a single text to the charter officers. Outside in the parking lot, a single horn honked. The 95 men as one turned their backs on the hospital. There was no shouting, no protest. Just the methodical, disciplined sound of 95 men mounting their Harleys. The ground-shaking roar of their engines starting up was a defiant, rolling peal of thunder, a promise of their return. Then, as a single organized column, they rumbled out of the parking lot, past the gawking filming news crews, and restaged on the public street 500 feet away, a distant, silent wall of leather and chrome, just at the legal limit. The cafeteria felt terribly, suddenly empty. It was just Gunner and Bishop, isolated, facing a laptop screen. The tension was unbearable. Gunner was now inside the wire, his army just out of reach. "Now," Judge Vance said, his eyes narrowing. "Let's begin. Mr. Finch, you're representing Detective Hoffman. You claim Mr. Riley is a danger to this child. Convince me." Finch, though rattled, was a professional snake. He took a breath and launched into his pre-prepared case. It was a masterpiece of deception. "Your Honor," he began, his voice smooth and filled with pained, masculine reason, "this is a tragedy. A boy, Caleb Williams, lost his mother 6 months ago in a horrific, unthinkable car accident. His stepfather, Detective Kurt Hoffman, a man who has served this city for 15 years, a decorated hero who has pulled children from burning buildings, has been trying by himself to hold their shattered family together." He painted a vivid picture of Caleb as a deeply disturbed, grieving teenager. "The boy is unwell, Your Honor. He's prone to lashing out, to fantasies. He's in counseling, but he's resisting. He's angry. He's looking for anyone to blame for his mother's death." Finch's face grew somber. "The fall down the stairs that brought him here? A tragic but thoroughly investigated domestic accident. The boy was distraught. He has a history of self-harm. Detective Hoffman is just trying to get him the help he needs." Then Finch turned his sights on Gunner. "Into this fragile, tragic situation comes Mr. Grant Riley. He is not a concerned friend, Your Honor. He is the president of the San Bernardino Hells Angels, a documented one-percenter criminal organization. He is a man who represents violence, narcotics, and lawlessness. He has descended on this hospital with nearly 100 of his gang members, terrorizing staff, intimidating law enforcement, and attempting to kidnap a vulnerable minor." Finch leaned into his camera. We believe Mr. Riley is systematically manipulating this disturbed child, feeding his paranoid delusions, turning him against his only living guardian. Detective Hoffman isn't here as a cop, Your Honor. He's here as a father, desperately trying to protect his son from a predator. We ask the court to enforce the TRO fully, dismiss this petition, and release this boy to his father's care immediately. The presentation was perfect. It was logical. It was emotional. It painted Hoffman as the victim and Gunnar as the villain. Gunnar sat there, his hands clenched into white-knuckled fists on the table, forced to listen to the poisonous, twisted-in version of the truth. He looked at the laptop screen. Judge Vance was unreadable. His granite face showed nothing, no hint of which way he was leaning. Judge Vance's face on the laptop screen was unreadable, a slab of granite. Finch's performance had been perfect, a compelling narrative of a grieving father and a disturbed child. The air in the cafeteria was so thin, Gunnar felt like he was breathing dust. He and Bishop were isolated, their army 500 feet away, and a hero cop had just painted them as the monsters. Then Bishop leaned forward. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't get angry. He became a surgeon. Your Honor, Bishop began, his voice calm and precise, Mr. Finch has painted a very moving picture. A tragedy. He is, however, omitting the brushstrokes that show the real monster in that picture. He calls Detective Hoffman a grieving widower. But a grieving widower does not, in the 2 years preceding his wife's accidental death, send her to 3 different emergency rooms. Bishop slid the first ER report under the laptop's camera. This is from Desert Springs. A broken wrist attributed to a fall down the stairs. The same excuse he used for Caleb. He slid the next one. This is from UMC. A fractured zygomatic arch, a broken cheekbone from a car door. And this, he slid the third, is from Mountain View. A concussion and 2 bruised ribs from a fainting spell. This wasn't a tragedy, Your Honor. It was a pattern. It was a slow-motion murder that ended when her car's brakes accidentally failed. Finch started to object. Speculation, Your Honor. I'm not finished, Bishop said, his voice dropping an octave, silencing Finch. Mr. Finch then paints Caleb as a disturbed, self-harming child. And yet, this pattern of accidents and disturbances only seems to have truly escalated in the 6 months since his mother died. Since he became the sole focus of Detective Hoffman's attention. Finally, Bishop said, Mr. Finch paints his client as a hero cop and a father, just trying to get by. But grieving fathers don't liquidate their 401ks. They don't sell their properties. And they certainly don't wire $200,000 to an offshore, untraceable account in the Cayman Islands 3 days ago. Bishop slid the bank transfer summary into view. This isn't the action of a man holding his family together, Your Honor. This is the action of a guilty man building an escape hatch. This is a man who knows he's been found out, and he is preparing to run. The silence on the video call was deafening. Finch's face was ashen. He had built a narrative and Bishop had just firebombed it with facts. Gunnar watched Judge Vance. The judge's eyes were narrowed. He was looking at Hoffman's tiny, frozen image on the screen, then at Finch's, then at the evidence. He was trapped. The word of a decorated cop versus the word of a Hell's Angel, supported by a pile of deeply disturbing but still circumstantial evidence. It was a 50-50 call that could go either way. Mr. Cole, Judge Vance said, his voice a low growl, you've presented a compelling and deeply disturbing counter-narrative. Mr. Finch, your client's public record is exemplary. This is a stalemate. The judge rubbed his shaved head. I am left with only one option. I want to hear from the minor. Now. Objection. Finch was on his feet, his composure gone. Your Honor, the boy is heavily medicated. He's suggestible. He's been subjected to hours of intimidation by this criminal. He's the only one who knows the truth, Your Honor, Bishop countered calmly. And he's the one who asked for our help. I've heard you, Mr. Finch, Vance snapped. Your objection is noted and it is overruled. You're worried your client's victim is suggestible. I'm worried he's terrorized. Get the boy. Get him on this call. And get Miss Klein, the social worker, in there with him. The next 5 minutes were the longest of Gunnar's life. The video feed was silent, just the 4 men staring at each other. Gunnar could hear his own heartbeat in his ears, a heavy, desperate drum. Then a door opened on the video feed in Hoffman's room, and Laura Klein wheeled Caleb into view, parking the wheelchair beside the detective's conference table. The boy was a wreck. He was pale, his gown hanging off his small frame, his blue cast a sickening splash of color. He looked at the laptop screen and saw Hoffman. His entire body flinched, a violent, full-bodied recoil as if he'd been struck. Hoffman, on the other hand, smiled. It was a thin, terrifying private smile of pure possession. It wasn't meant for the judge. It was meant for Caleb. Said, "You're mine. You can't escape. Tell them and I will end you." Caleb was frozen. He was hyperventilating, his one good eye wide with a terror so profound it was paralyzing. He was shutting down. "Son," Judge Vance said, his voice attempting a gentleness that his gravelly tone couldn't quite manage. "My name is Judge Vance. I need you to tell me what's going on. I need you to tell me the truth. Are you safe with Detective Hoffman?" Caleb couldn't speak. He was just staring at Hoffman's smiling face caught in the headlights. Gunnar couldn't take it. He shoved his chair back, the legs scraping loudly on the cafeteria tile. He stood up, leaning into his own laptop camera, his massive frame filling the screen. "Caleb." The boy's head snapped toward the sound. He saw Gunnar. "Caleb." "Look at me," Gunnar commanded, his voice a low, steady rumble. "Not at him. He can't touch you. I'm right here. Deuce's blood. Remember? I'm right here. It's okay, kid. You're safe. Now tell him. Tell the judge what you told me. Tell the truth." Caleb looked at Gunnar, this mountain of patched leather and absolute loyalty who had crossed the desert for him. He looked at Hoffman's sneering, confident face. He looked at the judge, waiting. He took one ragged, shuddering breath. And the fear in his eyes was burned away by a sudden white-hot flash of pure, clarifying rage. He turned his wheelchair to face his own camera, his eyes locking with the judge's. His voice was small but it didn't shake. "He's lying," Caleb said. Finch started to speak but Caleb talked right over him. "He's lying about everything. The fall? It wasn't a fall." He looked straight at Hoffman. He was hurting me, in my room. And I tried to fight him. I tried to push him off. He got mad. He got so mad. He grabbed my arm and he threw me against the wall. He kept saying, 'You're just like her. You're worthless just like her.' He hurt my mom too," Caleb continued, his voice gaining strength, the words tumbling out. "All the time. I heard them fighting. I heard her crying. He killed her." "Objection." Finch bellowed, his face purple. "Fantasies. This is slander. The boy is clearly delusional, Your Honor. He's conflating grief with these lurid accusations." "Then what's this?" Caleb shouted, his voice cracking but clear. He talked right over the lawyer's objections, silencing the room. He fumbled in the pocket of his jeans, the ones Laura had brought from his house. His fingers closed around something small. He pulled it out and held it up to the camera. It was a small, black, encrypted hard drive. "My mom gave this to me," Caleb said, his voice now ringing with the absolute power of the truth. "A week before she died. She said she had an insurance policy. She said if anything ever happened to her or if he ever touched me." His voice broke on the word. "She said I had to give this to someone I trust. She said to give it to Gunnar." Hoffman on the other screen went sheet white. He looked like he'd been gutted. "She said it was his dirty work." Caleb cried. "It's his ledgers, bank accounts, names. He was taking payoffs from the dealers he arrested. He was stealing drugs and money right out of the LVPD evidence locker. He was selling it." Caleb was sobbing now, but he didn't stop. He pointed a trembling finger at the screen. "That's why he killed her. Not just because she was leaving. Because she found it. She was going to expose him to the whole department." The confession hung in the air. It was the kill shot. It was the smoking gun. It was everything. Finch was silent. Bishop was silent. Vance was silent. Hoffman's mask didn't just crack. It vaporized. The hero cop, the grieving father, was gone, replaced by a cornered, rabid animal. His eyes, wide with pure, murderous panic, darted around his own room. "He's lying." Hoffman's roar was feral, inhuman, exploding from the laptop speakers. "The little brat is lying." He lunged. Not at his lawyer. Not at the cops in his room. He lunged at his own laptop, as if he could somehow claw his way through the screen and throttle the boy who had just destroyed him. But he never made it. The two uniformed cops who had been standing impassively behind him, his moral support, reacted instantly. They weren't Hoffman's men. They were LVPD. And they had just heard a fellow officer, a detective, implicated in a massive, systematic corruption ring that tainted their entire department, topped off with the murder of a witness. Their faces were masks of pure, unadulterated disgust. As Hoffman lunged, they moved. They grabbed him by the back of his tactical vest and his hair. Hoffman roared, fighting them. "Get your hands off me. I'll have your badges. I'll have your families." It was his final mistake. The younger cop, his face tight with fury, slammed Hoffman's head down once onto the polished conference table. The thud was sickening. They wrenched his arms behind his back, forcing him down, his decorated uniform scraping on the wood. His panic, his violent rage, was a confession louder than any words. Cuffs clicked shut. That 15-year-old boy, broken and terrified, his body a map of his tormentor's cruelty, stood up to the monster who had taken everything from him. He faced him down, and with the truth as his only weapon, he brought the entire corrupt system crashing to the ground. He is a warrior. Comment, Caleb is a warrior, down below if you're not siding with the monster who tried to break him. In the cafeteria, Gunnar slowly sat down, his knees weak. On the screen, Judge Vance watched the struggle, his face cold and dead. He waited until Hoffman was fully secured and being read his rights. "Detective Hoffman," Vance's voice cut through the room like a blade, "you are in contempt. You are also under arrest for conspiracy, racketeering, and suspicion of murder, pending the evidence on that drive." He turned his gaze to Bishop. "Mr. Cole, your petition for emergency guardianship on behalf of Mr. Grant Riley is granted, effective immediately. Miss Klein, you will release that boy into Mr. Riley's custody. Get that drive to the U.S. Attorney's office. Not the LVPD. We're done here." The screen went black. The screen went black. For a full 30 seconds, the only sound in the cafeteria was the hum of the vending machine. Gunnar, Bishop, and Doc sat in the aftermath, the adrenaline draining away, leaving a heavy, bone-deep exhaustion. It was done. An hour later, the paperwork was signed. The emergency custody order was in Gunnar's hand, a single piece of paper that held more power than Hoffman's entire police department. Bishop had already given his statement to a federal prosecutor who was ecstatic about the hard drive. Doc had wiped his laptop and was already coordinating the ride home. Laura Klein met them at the elevator, her eyes red but shining. Caleb was beside her. He wasn't in the pathetic hospital gown anymore. Laura had found him a new pair of jeans, a black t-shirt, and fresh sneakers from a hospital donation closet. He was still pale, his face a swollen map of yellow and purple, his arm in its bright blue cast, but he stood straighter. The paralyzing terror was gone, replaced by a quiet, shell-shocked uncertainty. He looked like a refugee, a boy standing on the shore of a new country with no idea what language they spoke. "He's all yours, Mr. Riley," Laura said, her voice thick with emotion. She squeezed Caleb's good shoulder. "Be safe, Caleb." "Thank you," Caleb whispered, his voice hoarse. Gunnar just nodded at her, a look of profound, silent respect that she would remember for the rest of her life. The elevator ride down was silent. Caleb kept his eyes on the floor, his small frame dwarfed between the two massive men, Gunnar and Bishop. He was still expecting the other shoe to drop, for Hoffman to appear around a corner, for this all to be a trick. The elevator doors opened to the lobby. The news crews were there now, a swarm of them, cameras and microphones held back by the very hospital security that had tried to eject Gunnar. They saw him and surged forward, shouting questions. "Mr. Riley, is it true Detective Hoffman has been arrested? Are the charges related to his wife's death? Who is the boy?" Gunnar didn't look at them. He put his massive, non-injured hand on Caleb's back, shielding him from the cameras, and steered him toward the automatic doors. Bishop ran interference, his voice like a whip. "No comment. My client is taking his godson home. Back off." The doors slid open with a whoosh and Caleb stepped out into the late afternoon sun. He stopped, dead in his tracks. The parking lot was no longer empty. The 95 Hells Angels were back. But they weren't in a perimeter. They were lined up in two perfect parallel rows, their Harleys forming a long, wide corridor of chrome and steel that stretched from the hospital's entrance all the way to the main road. 95 men standing at rigid attention beside their machines. They weren't moving. They weren't talking. They were just waiting. It wasn't a mob. It was an honor guard. Caleb just stared, his mouth open. He had never seen anything like it. The sheer, silent, disciplined power of it was overwhelming. Then a figure stepped out from the front rank. It wasn't a man. It was a woman, her face as weathered and tough as Gunner's, her gray-streaked hair in a tight braid. Her cut was just as worn as the others, and the patch on her chest read, "Mama Bear Road Captain." She moved with an authority that matched Gunner's own, and she was holding a small black, new leather cut. A vest. She stopped in front of Caleb, her eyes, surprisingly soft, taking in his bruised face, his broken arm. "You're Deuce's boy," she said, her voice a rough, smoky growl. It wasn't a question. Caleb nodded, speechless. She held up the vest. It was his size. On the back, in full, glorious, intimidating color, was the iconic Hell's Angels death head. "We don't do this." "Not ever," she said, her voice low. "But your blood. You held the line. You spoke the truth when a coward tried to break you." She gently, carefully, slipped the vest over his shoulders, her rough fingers navigating his cast. She settled the weight of the leather on him. It was heavy and smelled of new dye and old coats. "You're not an orphan, kid," she said, her voice thick with an emotion she rarely showed. "You're not a victim. You're family. And nobody touches our family. Ever again. You understand me?" Caleb looked down at the new leather, then up at the 95 stone-faced killers standing watch over him. He felt the weight of the patch on his back, a shield he had never dreamed of. He'd woken up this morning as a terrified, broken secret, a boy who thought he was going to die. And now he was surrounded by 96 of the most loyal and dangerous protectors on Earth. He wasn't just safe. He was claimed. Tears he didn't know he had left streamed down his face, but they weren't tears of fear. They were tears of relief so profound it buckled his knees. He looked up at Gunner, who had been watching, his face impassive. Gunner's eyes, however, were not. He nodded once, then jerked his chin toward his panhead at the head of the column. Caleb wiped his face with his good hand, his shoulders straight for the first time in his life. He walked to the bike and, with a little help, climbed onto the passenger seat behind Gunner. He settled in, his small hands tentatively grabbing Gunner's cut. He wrapped his fingers in the heavy leather, holding onto the patch as if it were the only solid thing in the universe. Gunner looked over his left shoulder, then his right, surveying the long corridor of his men. He faced forward. He didn't have to shout. His voice was a roar that carried over the entire parking lot. "Angels, let's ride." The response was not a sound. It was a physical event. It was an explosion. 96 V-twin engines ignited at the exact same instant, a single deafening concussive boom that shook the windows of the hospital and sent a flock of birds scattering from the roof. It was the sound of a promise kept. It was the sound of 96 hearts beating as one. It was the sound of absolute, unadulterated freedom. Gunner kicked the panhead into gear. Slowly he rolled forward, down the corridor of his brothers. As he passed, each biker swung a leg over their machine, mounted up, and fell in one by one, merging into the formation behind him with perfect, practiced precision. They rode in for one and they're riding out with one more. They're a rolling fortress of loyalty, a family forged in fire, protecting their own. If you believe this is what true family looks like, hit subscribe and smash the like button. Only a cold-hearted snake like Hoffman, who preyed on the weak, would ignore a story like this. The convoy, now 96 bikes strong with a small, patched boy at its heart, pulled out onto the highway. The news cameras filmed, the onlookers stared as the miles-long serpent of steel and loyalty left the city limits. They headed west, away from the hospital, away from the nightmare, riding directly into the heart of the setting sun.